So welcome everyone to chapter 6 on the gate of heaven. And I really enjoyed this chapter. So it was great that I got to create questions, but I really had a difficult time narrowing it down because I had way more questions to be answered. I didn't have answers actually when I sent them out to you. I just asked questions. So I had to answer them from myself as well. So I hope that some of them at least resonated with you. And we'll just begin with the first question and the quote. And this is coming back from the Judgment Seat and the final scene. And the part of the book of this chapter was, I'll just read it out. I am more than a little surprised that in the end, there was no, shall I say, decision arrived at. There was a suggestive pause, and then he asked, where did the last scene leave you? Lying on the slopes where Helen found me, with the boy in my arms. Another short silence. That seems to suggest another commencement rather than an ending, he answered reflectively. I would be somewhat out of place to hear a decision in such a connection, would it not? But what was there to introduce the final scene? That is my difficulty. So I have a couple of questions about that. Did you feel that Aphraar received a final decision after his experience on the Judgment Seat? Or did you have expectations of what that would look like? And I also have a second question of the final hours. Do our final hours on earth represent our true selves? Or does the final scene of a life on earth bear such importance for every person, or only in certain unique circumstances? How do you feel about this? So how did you feel about this part of the chapter? What are your feelings on it? Karen?
Yeah, kind of some mixed feelings here. So the first one, did I feel that Aphraar received a final decision? It was hard to kind of cast my mind back because obviously once I've read the chapter, it's obvious that a decision has been made. But when I was kind of thinking back to when I finished chapter 5, no, I didn't feel that there was some decision that had been reached. And did I have any expectations of what I felt it would look like? No, I don't think I did. I kind of feel like that everything we do, every part of our lives is influencing our soul condition. And I didn't really have a vision of what would happen when you get judged. I don't have that concept of like Christians that you reach the gate of heavens and you're either sent to hell or into heaven. So I don't know what I was expecting to happen to Aphraar. And then the second question, do our final hours here on earth always represent our true selves? Well, I think for most people there's no difference in their final hours. They're exactly the same as they've always been. Somebody that passes in their sleep or someone that has a heart attack, I'm going to have to maybe come back. I've got some kind of noise going on outside. I'm sorry, Virginia.
Okay.
I can go.
Okay.
Yeah. So my feeling about, I feel like he did receive a judgment, like he did receive a final decision. I feel like because once he passed, he was at the slope. And the fact that he was basically at the top of the first sphere and second sphere, to me, that is kind of like a decision that is where that he didn't have to go to hell. He didn't have to go through those experiences. Is the type of decision that he didn't need to pay off that penalty. And I also feel that the fact that he's now in the 6th sphere is also kind of a decision that, well, you're now worthy enough or good enough or pure enough to become at one with God. So I felt like those were kind of decisions, but that we don't have a judge in a black robe saying it out loud what it is. You know, it's just you find yourself in certain condition and you can make certain assumptions. And then I also feel that I feel like if you live a long life, then by the time you pass, you're looking closer to what your soul condition really is. So maybe it does make a difference that you can see yourself going, okay, this is what I look like now. So this must be my soul condition. So I feel like it is a message. It is important. It does give you a sense of evaluation. Versus if you die quickly, like murder or accident, then you don't get time to process. But if you die slowly, you have time to process your experience, and maybe you get a chance to look back and maybe connect to some emotions like remorse, regrets, repentance. At least some emotion can start flowing, and maybe that can create some change, so that by the time you pass, you've gone through some changes, some openness, some things have begun to shift. Those were my thoughts.
Thank you, Mila. Michaela?
Just sort of going on with what Mila just said, when I was working in palliative care, it seems that, you know, it's so standard that once people get to a certain point of their health or their death, there's so much medication that the spirit's just not even really present in the body anymore. So I just kind of feel like we just kind of degrade to the point of death, and it's not necessarily the common thing that people are reflecting on where they're at. They're just kind of suffering through the process to their death. It is what I kind of observed.
Thank you. Karen, welcome back.
Let's try again. So yeah, I feel that the final scene in our, like when we pass, I don't feel it's any more important than any other point in our life. I feel like it has the same importance as any other thing we've done in our life. I don't feel there's some special significance to it. In this case, I feel Aphraar, you'll see that Omra's pointing out to him, I think it's from page 56, it says that one unpremeditated act was not so foreign to your nature and daily life as you may imagine. It was rather the well-matured harvest of a carefully cultivated sympathy you had encouraged for those who, like yourself, had experienced the hunger for affection and companionship, which was beyond their reach. So I feel like Aphraar's been doing all of these small acts, all of his life, which is building on each other. So building his faith, I guess, is each time he's doing one of these acts, he has a feeling. And then it's kind of accumulated in this final scene where he's dived in front of the horse and carriage to save the child. And then he's passed. But I feel somebody could have done that and managed to grab the child and not pass, and then keep going on with their life, and maybe then they passed in their sleep. So I just have a feeling that, yeah, our final hours on earth aren't necessarily so different, and it's probably more in recent years, like Michaela was saying, where people are being drugged so they don't have to feel the physical pain they're in. That's, I feel, probably a newer development. Yeah.
Thank you. Judith?
Hi, yeah. What I felt curious about that question in that chapter was just how Aphraar just kept on asking for a decision as if a judgment was placed, which is kind of like our idea of, like, we all kind of feel, and even Aphraar, who doesn't have any kind of religious beliefs, that we get judged. And I thought it was kind of interesting that, Virginia, you got assigned this chapter, because we both have like this Catholic thing going on where we get judged, you know?
Yeah.
That's what it pushed in my, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. But I did think he did get an answer. He just doesn't know it yet. It's just about, we're basically shown our feelings and who we are. And the more we get into the place to do that, the more we get to see, and that's how we grow in the spirit world and in life, And I like what Michaela said about the people who die. And I just thought recently there's a woman I know on Facebook who has cancer, and she's in a lot of addiction, I think, about it right now. And I thought that's interesting, where she wants to elicit sympathy from people and get everyone to pray for her and things like that. And so I guess I kind of feel like what Karen says, we're still the same people, regardless of when we start and how we die. I think in Aphraar's case, something happened that really showed his personality and a portion of who he is, that empathetic person that got explained later on in the chapter, or maybe in a future chapter, because I've been reading a little bit ahead. So
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Selena?
When I look at judgment, I kind of want it to be sort of not like a judgment like in a court, but more like an assessment, like a job review. That's kind of how I would like it to look, but it's like Aphraar, it's being done not in a human way, but in God's way, which is Aphraar is just shown. It's almost like he makes his own assessment of what he's shown of himself. It's like he's given that opportunity to make your own assessment. What do you think happened there? Which is kind of different. So I did find myself kind of wanting that. What did you do right? What did you do wrong? How can we improve things? I wanted that. Oh my God. Okay, move forward, kind of thing. Yeah. And as far as the second question, I think it's possible you can have end of life things, but like maybe in some extreme circumstances, maybe you're in a war and you find you can't shoot anybody, so you're just busy trying to rescue your buddies, keep them out of harm's way. And that happens. I've actually talked to people that have had experiences like that, where they weren't dying, they were young, but that can happen in really extreme circumstances. You don't just do your duty, or you just do the right thing and try to save people. Yeah. But I think they have to be kind of extreme. I don't really believe deathbed conversions are really a thing.
Okay, thank you, Selena. Pat?
Yeah, I find this chapter had a lot in it and I had trouble connecting to it. I agree with Dharm that I think a decision was made when he passed, because that's where he ended up, was on the slope. So that shows how much love he had in him. That was one of the thoughts I had. And regarding the final hours on Earth, I think you don't change just because you're dying. I think your character has come through. But I think when you're close to death and you're old, I think a lot of times, and this comes from religion, they call in the minister or the priest to give you the last rites, or you think you can just say a prayer and all your sins are forgiven. I think some people leave the earth thinking that they don't have to do anything. They just go have their sins forgiven.
They're all done.
Yeah, yeah, and everything will be okay.
Yeah. Oh.
Judgment, I don't like the word judgment either. I think it has a lot of negative baggage for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, God doesn't judge us. So I'm not even sure why it's called the judgment seat. But maybe it's just because of the emotional baggage I have with the word judgment.
Okay. Thank you, Pat. Alicia?
Yeah, I think as Pat just said, the judgment brings up a lot of old stuff of being judged maybe as a child for many of us, and then judging ourselves. And yeah, I feel like he had it was decided, but he just wasn't really that aware of it, which for me seems like with so many things in life, it's like we may have a benefit or a correction, but we're not that aware of it at the time. But he became aware, obviously, as we read later on. And I feel like you said, does this represent our true selves? As everybody's alluded to, I feel like it's representing his soul condition as it is at that time. And thank you for this question, because it brought up a wonderfully emotional memory for me of thinking that I was just about to die, and that I was like, gonna die. And so that was a great question, because it brought up memories of that and remembering what went through me in those split seconds. And it's almost like it builds something in you of realizing that, as Karen said later on in the chapter, it says about it's a build-up, it's an accumulation. So it's almost like the way you pass is an accumulation plus. As some others have said, of course, if you've got time, you'll perhaps realize that maybe my time is coming, and so I'll start thinking about the things that I've done that were not so pleasant, maybe. So you'll start to maybe change, but of course it's just changing your soul condition. It's not changing your true self, I feel.
Oh, thank you. Anyone else? Michael, you had your hand up and then you took it down. Okay.
Going up and down.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the second question. I'm thinking of how illness is a result of sin and lack of love in our lives, and that if it continues long enough, it's going to carry through to the physical. So, our death can indicate how our life was led and what our major problems were. And because I'm thinking of how you can help a spirit to connect with a major emotional problem by asking them how they died.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think I can just offer that observation and not much specifics about that.
Oh, thank you. Anyone else? For myself, I did, because of my Catholic upbringing, I felt that I was expecting judgment to be, I wasn't expecting it to be like harsh judgment. That's not what I would expect from God, but that it be a more detailed assessment. This is what I felt I hadn't even thought about it, but afterwards I felt like I want a more detailed assessment of what I had done and not done and where I was at. But like everyone else was saying, I agree with you that because of where he went through in the spirit world, what sphere he was then, that definitely those were indicators of where he was at. So it goes on. It's not just a one-time thing where you're getting judged or being in the judgment seat. So that was definitely different, enlightening for me. And the second one, I do feel that what happens in our final days and is definitely an indication of our soul condition, because everything has meaning, and just based on that, and I believe that every event, every transaction has some meaning or opportunity to learn, that it has to, but I don't fully understand it, and that's why I asked the question, because I don't quite understand it all. So go on to the second quote, which was, I called it discipline of obedience. At the close of the term, the soul passes on whatever place the elementary examination of the class shows it to be qualified for by its practical application of the love lesson. The liberty conceded to children in the lower class allows the free expression of individuality directed by the advice of underteachers. But in the higher school, a more rigorous system prevails and order obtains, and the older child is subjected to the discipline of obedience. How do you feel about that? And the words that were chosen for this, the law and order obtains and the older child is subjected to the discipline of obedience. What does it mean to bring up, what does this bring up for you? Or do you feel that we will have our gift of free will in existence under this discipline and obedience? Michael?
This was really different for me, because I think he's saying that on earth we're just taught to love, and we have free will and a lot of room to exercise it left and right. And I've made life much more complicated than that is. You know, got to pray for divine love, got to find my passions, got to do this and that. He's just saying it's all about love. Wow. And then it makes sense that we have some more limitation. We have limitations on what we can do with our free will, and then there's even more of it once we get in the spirit world. And so I don't think of that as law and order. I think of it as evidence of a orderly parent or God, you know, just more mercy and stuff. So I'm looking forward to that and working within those limitations.
Yeah, thank you. Michaela?
For this question, I was kind of just going on from the previous chapter, where what came really clear to me was that everything is so perfectly and finitely and precisely held and seen by God. So this concept of this obedience, it's like God is holding us in this perfect container that is responding to every choice that we make. So there's always going to be a response to whatever we do. But within that, we have the choice of what we choose to do, whether it's going to be loving or whether it's going to be not loving. And so that just feels like I definitely still want to rebel against it and feel like I can get away with doing things that aren't loving. But I'm also starting to open to the fact that I can't, and that everything is seen and everything is reacted to by God.
Oh, thank you, Michaela. Alicia?
Yeah, this one again brings up for me the discipline of obedience and the wanting to rebel, as Michaela said, because of the error in the way that discipline and obedience was administered, let's say, from our first governors as our parents and early school. And it also brought up, similar to Michael saying that I feel like I have free will whether I'm here or there, but the structure has become more limited. So it's almost like it's easier to find a more straight way. And it's always dependent on my desire anyway, whether I'm here or in the spirit world. It's just that when I'm here, I'm perhaps less likely, because it's almost like the structure is larger and I can take more paths, whereas there, it seems as if it's narrower. And I feel like I have more trust in that it's more loving than it has been in the past, in my past experience.
Oh, thank you. Laura?
Yeah, so this brings to mind the talk in the last assistance group, I think it was, of the human law hangover, where just like what Michaela was saying, we have all these rebellions due to the different ways that we were treated, or you know, societal norms and that kind of thing. And so we've developed these ways of kind of getting away with things that we want to get away with, whether it's, you know, through a tantrum or whatever it is. We feel that we can choose which ones we want to obey and which ones we don't, based on whether we see a consequence as like bad or not, I suppose. But then when you start to realize that actually we can't get away with anything, and when we try, there's just repercussions of that. Like every single time, there's no escaping it. It's like if you sin, there's a consequence. But if you obey the laws and act within the loving way that they're structured, there's a loving consequence. So you kind of get to wage which decision you want to make. It's like, do you want to progress in love or not? So having said all that, I definitely have a lot of emotions around rebellion from my parents and society and all of that. So it's triggering in a way, yeah, because I know just how much I still don't want to abide by the rules. You know, little tiny things like speeding a little bit, or, you know, I can see that I just have this tendency to want to just do my own thing and not be governed or controlled by anyone. So I have definite emotions about being controlled and all that. So yeah, it's definitely brought us a lot of stuff up.
Wow. Yeah. No, I'm with you there for sure. Thank you, Laura.
It was quite long-winded, but anyway.
Pat?
Yeah, this brings up whether I look at obedience from man's view or from God's view. And from man's view, I have a lot of baggage because we are taught from our parents and teachers and religions, and we have to obey whether it was logical or not, whether it made any sense. But learning from divine truth that God's obedience is just teaching us how to love and teaching us how to become happy. So when I think of it from God's perspective, I'm okay with the word obedience, but I still have blocks from man's viewpoint of obedience. But I also feel that we always still have free will as well, because I agree with what everyone else is saying about free will, that we can do whatever we want. We can still disobey God's laws, but there are consequences, but we can still disobey if we want to. So I think we always have a choice of free will. It's just what choice are we going to make? That's my
Great,
point.
thank you. Thank you, Pat. Anyone else? Oh, Mila. I was looking for a hand, a different hand. I forgot.
So the gift of free will comes with it the responsibility about the stewardship of the gift. So that because we have the gift of free will, we have to learn how not to damage other living beings in the use of the free gift of the gift of free will. So that's why I think we have the kind of like the correction, so that we can learn to be responsible steward of this incredible gift. So that's my perspective on it. So I see that, yes, it is my free will, but it's about the responsibility of what that gift means. And that's why there's corrections. And so in that case, I feel that it's reasonable, that it is reasonable to learn how not to harm my fellow human beings. It is reasonable to receive correction on being responsible with the gift. So I'm kind of becoming more accepting of the consequences I've earned, even though I still have strong addictions that want to be met, but I'm also accepting the consequence that I'm earning because of it.
Oh, thank you. Yep. I guess Karen?
Yeah, to say I agree with what everyone's been saying so far, that yeah, free will, it's a choice whether you use it or not. Like Mila was saying, though, it has responsibilities, and the same as what Michaela and Laura and Alicia, Pat really saying that it's, I still have a lot of emotions about rebelling against authority. I'm happy to go along with it if I agree with it, but if I don't agree with it, then yeah, I've got issues and I'm trying to rebel against it. But on the other hand, though, I do feel that the law, I have this feeling that it's fair, that it's just, because we're all getting treated equally. And in that, that gives me a lot of faith and reassurance, I guess, that it's not, somebody's not being treated differently in this circumstance. And so I do have a lot of faith in that. And the book itself, probably just in the last month, I've had more of a desire to be obedient, which is new for me. And so I've had this desire that I've wanted to start following these laws, because I'm having more faith that God is loving and that God loves me, and that by following these, I can be corrected. And so it's kind of a mixed one. So I still have these emotions from my childhood where I was very controlled and I want to be rebelling against that, but there's also at the same time this other desire to actually start to follow them. So yeah, bit mixed.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Just to give a side note, so Karen, your decision, what's compelling you to obey is because you love the parent. It's a decision to love, right? You love the parent that made the laws, and that's why you feel like obeying.
Yeah, it's love of God, and I can see how the laws are loving. I'm starting to see how they really personally apply to me, whereas before I've just felt they're quite general. I'm really starting to experience them, that God's personally helping me with them. He's trying to correct me, and the longer I stay in this rebellion, the unhappier I'm going to be, and the sooner I start to follow them, the sooner I'm going to be happier and can get to this abundant condition. So it's having that kind of motivation to love. And I guess too, there's been this real desire in me lately to learn how to love, but what is loving from God's way, not what I think it is, which is pretty off sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
But I feel that more than just your desire to love each other, you love who made the laws. You love the purpose of why he made those laws. And so it's a just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
Thank you. Judith?
Yeah, just briefly, it's really interesting. It's really good to hear this, because when I read this question, I was put off by the term obedience, and I just kind of glossed over it and didn't even want to think about it. But I realized that free will and compensation have to exist together. One can't be there without the other. So there's always going to be us having a message or being told that we're doing something that's not in harmony with love, which would be the compensation. So even when that compensation harms, like children, for example, God doesn't rescue the children. The bad things continue to happen, and that's part of us learning our lesson on why it's unloving. So that's just.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I feel like as well, there's just with the corrections that we've kind of been speaking about, the process of correcting like sin or an injury, or and if it's perpetuated to harm other people as well, like that's quite a big process. And through learning all of this and recognizing what it takes to actually heal the damage that we've caused, then when you do get to the spirit world and you reach a certain level of development, like the way that it's been developed is that you just, because of the amount of effort and time it's has gone into correcting the issue, that we're just not going to want to do that again as well. So like our desire changes based on recognizing the entirety of the damage that we've caused through our sin, through our choice to sin. So I think that's where free will is engaged as well. And, you know, the more you develop, the less you're going to want to actually harm people. And so then the obedience becomes, it's not like a chore. It's like, this is like, I actually want to do this way, because, you know, the consequence is huge otherwise, but also, you know, yeah, anyway, you get the gist.
Thank you. Mila?
I just want to address Judith's comment just now. One of the emotions I'm working through is that God didn't rescue me as a child. And I have a lot of grief and anger about the fact that God doesn't rescue children. But I'm also recognizing that that's my error. And at some point, as I continue processing my emotion, I'll probably come to a different conclusion that God probably is rescuing children, but not in the way that we think. And so I'm kind of staying open, that I'm waiting for an upgrade of my current belief that God doesn't rescue children and God allow people to harm children. That I'm probably in an error in that perspective. Is this my pain speaking? And that at some point, as I keep progressing, I'll probably come to a different conclusion. Just wanted to point that out. We're still in the process of healing that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Mila. Michaela?
I just wanted to add to what Mila just said, because I had that thought as well. Was one thing that I learned recently when my children were in a situation that was quite dangerous, and I really had to open up my faith and belief that God is good and that they are not alone. I really developed more understanding about the sleep state and what happens in the sleep state, and also just the almost like the protective coating that comes onto children through prayer and wishes and stuff. So I feel like, yeah, we really can't conceive of how much God is trying and is present within our life to protect us to the best. I mean, yeah, that's just, yes, I agree with you with that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Michaela. Anyone else? Yes. The reason that I did pick that question was because those words did trigger me as well. As every time I hear the word discipline or obedience, I immediately feel like my free will is going to get taken away. And I don't want that to happen to me again because of what that felt like. So it's great that you all said that it's because it is rebellion. And I didn't see it as that I am feeling that. And that is a block because it's keeping me from feeling these other, emotions from God and what it truly is, not what I'm, just because I'm being triggered here from what's happened previously in my life. So thank you for that. That was very enlightening. I'm glad I asked the question because of what I don't feel it yet emotionally, but I do understand and agree with what's being said about this. So thank you for that. So we'll go to the next question. Question number 4. This is when Aphraar asks Omra to speak plainly to help him understand. I will endeavor to speak plainly, he answered with quiet deliberation after a brief silence. But let me answer your first inquiry by word of explanation. What you are pleased to call mysticism is the native language of the soul. That is not understood by you due to the fact that so far you have not been liberated from the final influences of the earth. you have not entered into the full freedom of the spirit. How do you feel about the word chosen here, mysticism, of the language of the soul? Is it possible to connect to your soul in our physical bodies in a meaningful way, while we're here on earth? And if yes, how do you feel that happens? Karen? And then Laura.
First, I had to look up the word mysticism because I was like, hang on. So I'm gonna have to come back to me. Sorry, Virginia. I'm not.
Okay, no worries. Okay, thanks, Karen. Laura?
Yeah, the thing that stands out to me was in the second part of your question, is it possible to connect with our soul while in our physical bodies in a meaningful way? I feel like I've had some feedback on this about my belief that I didn't believe that I was a soul. And so I feel like there's possibly some error in that we have to connect to our soul, because I think that there's no choice. We just are our soul. That's who we are. Like, that's who God made us to be, and that is our true self. So connecting with, I don't know, I guess that means that we're separated from our soul, but I don't think that's even possible. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, and as far as mysticism goes, of the language of the soul, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I struggled with that a little bit. But yeah, anyway, it's my two bobs.
Thank you, Laura. Judith?
Hi, I actually just kind of empathized with Aphraar because he was like getting frustrated. And I kind of feel that way myself. Like I never can, I can't feel my guide, or she's not talking to me. And it's like him telling me, just speak in English, what are you trying to tell me? But instead of something, but I guess divine truth is all about us connecting to our soul. It's about being honest with who we are and praying and not judging our emotions and doing all those things. And ironically, before this meeting, a couple of days ago on my YouTube, a video came up, and it was a YouTube clip of Jesus saying, "How do you connect to your soul?" It was one of Divine Truth's clips. So I'll send you the link if you want, but it's just basically the same thing, being honest, your intention, things like that, which I struggle with because I don't know if I know I'm a soul, but I certainly have a lot of judgment and issues with feeling emotions. So that's,
Yeah. Michael?
Yeah, this whole path, I mean, we were designed to become at one with God on the earth, right? I mean, it says so earlier, and that process is becoming at one with our soul. So it has to happen. It just seems impossible, but maybe I have a little faith that it can happen. So yeah, is it possible to connect with our soul? Yeah, I think it's designed to happen, and that's what we're all doing. And I love the question about the mysticism, because you said that and I thought Khalil Gibran and all these poets that have tried to describe something that was out there, and they couldn't quite put words to it, but they were sensing it. So so now I can link mystics with people that are trying to describe something higher that they're feeling.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Karen? Try again.
Take two. Yeah, so saying, I had to even look up the word mysticism because I just had this concept of like, oh yeah, they're mystics or things like that. And so the definition was the belief that direct knowledge of God, spiritual truth, or ultimate reality can be obtained through subjective experience such as intuition or insight. And that's what I feel like Omra's trying to get Aphraar to do. And I, like Jude, I could sense Aphraar saying, just tell me, you know, kind of in plain English, like Jude saying, just tell me plainly what you mean. And he's saying to him, well, no, I'm trying to educate you in this is how the soul communicates. And so I was kind of reflecting on, like, here on earth, when we're born in our physical body, we have to learn to communicate through language. So we learn whatever language we're born into, and we use our physical senses mainly to communicate. So we're picking up on body language and what we hear and things like that. And there's a big emphasis on that. And then when we pass, it seems the spirit body has similar senses and that we can hear and speak, and maybe there's some extra things added to it, how they seem to automatically be able to see colors coming from people and things like that. But saying that the soul is using this more intuition type and all these other ways of communication. And I feel like we can definitely have that on earth. I feel like we're just so focused on physical ways of communication that we don't really spend time developing it. So to develop that, it's going to take practice, and it's going to take some perseverance with it. We can't just expect it just to suddenly develop. But I feel because we're so focused on what's physically happening, and most people don't even have an awareness of the soul. But I feel the soul, the wording of the question, I felt like, is it possible to connect with our soul in our physical bodies? I feel like it's almost impossible not to. I feel like the soul is connected to the physical body through the cords, and everything that's happening in the physical is being fed back to the soul. And so, like, the physical body is just like an appendage of the soul. So every time we have an emotion, that's stored in the soul. Every time we have a passion or wrong, that's in the soul. So I feel like you can't not be connected to it. You can try and deny it exists, but everything's being stored there, and everything in your, like, the law of attraction is just bringing everything in your environment based upon your soul condition. So I feel like, yeah, we can just not be so aware that that's happening, but it is happening. And if we put our awareness onto it and start to develop it, and I feel like it goes back to a little bit what we were talking about last week about how communicating with God, that you go inwards. It's not, and I feel that's why it's easier when you're not using your physical senses. You actually got being still and going inward, and it's a longing and a prayer, and you're receiving this love and information from God. That's coming about by using these soul senses, which seems to be easy to do when you're not crazy busy doing all these physical things, because we're so used to using our physical senses.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Karen. Selena?
I felt this as a, is when my intellect still wants to make decisions about what's happening in my soul. Like I decided I need to feel something, and then I feel it and I go, well, that doesn't feel right, because this to me logically seems like this should feel like that. And that to me is the mysticism, because my intellect and my soul aren't communicating at all. Like my intellect wants to dominate what's really happening. And I want to interpret the emotions in a way that makes sense to my intellect and not the way my soul is trying to express it. And that's where the mysticism comes in. To me, and it loses it when your intellect does become an appendage of that emotion, and you're not trying to make it make sense from your human experience. From, like, I think he was talking about that, is that you're still in your human attachment to how things should be, to how things should appear. Like when I have this sin, I should have this emotion. That makes sense to me. And then it's a different emotion, and you go, I'm not emotion. That's not logical. And you kind of fight it. So that's, to me, a lack of communication, which makes me feel that my soul's emotions are mystical, and they're really not. It's just that my brain wants to not really understand.
Yeah. Thank you, Selena. Alicia.
That word, mysticism, thanks for looking it up, by the way, and getting a proper detailed meaning for it, Karen. And I love that Michael brought up the mystics. I feel like even if I didn't really know about the fact that I'm a soul, that I'm actually already using it if I'm in an awareness of, as Karen mentioned, using your intuition and I don't know, maybe connecting to the senses that are not the normal senses that obviously a lot of people are. So it's meaningful to me in a relative way. It's relative to what we're capable of in each moment as our soul condition regresses or progresses. And so I feel like it is happening, and it's even more meaningful, of course, when we do realize that we have a soul and that everything is governed by that. The first thing that came to me when I read your question, Virginia, was I just can't grasp it with my mind. Just forget about my mind. I'm not going to get it. So just let that go. It's like it's almost intangible and yet tangible, and it has to penetrate in a way that is very subtle, and yet it has a huge power to change everything. So yeah, anyway, but thank you for the question. Great question.
Thank you, Alicia. Pat?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel that it is possible to connect with our soul. Intellectually, I feel that. I haven't felt it emotionally, but I think when we do connect with our soul, it will be in a more meaningful way. Sort of what Karen was saying, that when we depend on language and our intellect, everything gets filtered through our injuries. That's why I have problems with words like obedience or punishment or discipline or whatever, is because, or judgment. So if I'm talking to someone and I'm just intellectually hearing them, I might think they're judging me, but if I connect to my soul, I'd be able to connect to their soul and be able to feel them. And then I would feel that maybe they're loving me and they're not judging me, and maybe I can learn something from them. That's kind of what I was thinking of with the soul, that soul to soul communication is more reliable, and you get more truth. No facade. You can see the truth better. That was my take on it.
Thank you, Pat. Judith.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly say, I just realized this, but I feel like in reading this book, I think if we don't start to be more emotional and more feeling, the book might start to become really quite confusing, and we might not be able to understand it. I just noticed that when I was reading ahead, and then I was worrying about, when my time comes and I have to do this, am I even going to be able to formulate questions? Because I'm I don't know what I'm reading, because I'm not really getting into my emotions and starting to feel, as opposed to trying to intellectually figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thank you, Judith. Anyone else? Mila.
Back to Michael's comment about becoming at one with God is about becoming at one with our soul. Where'd you get that? That's the first time I'm hearing it.
I thought he said it.
Really?
I'll keep my ears open.
I would love to, yeah, if you can find that, that would be great. I'm like, wait, what? So I've been in a crisis ever since, going, what? So I'm like making notes, writing more questions. I'm kind of agitated, going, what do you mean? So that's taken me on a whole other tangent. But yeah, no, I'm really curious if that is the case. And Yeah, no, that comment has triggered a whole bunch of stuff for me. And what was the other? There were a couple other comments, but I'm too distracted by that one comment now. So if it comes back to me, I'll say more. Oh yes. So writing questions and coming from your soul. Well, to start with, your soul may have a lot of frustration, resentment, rebellion. Like, you're gonna have to be okay with what you find in your soul, which to start with, they're not very nice, pleasant emotions, which is why we judge them. But that to start with those the conflicts. I always start with the conflicts. So the question, if the passage I'm reading is bringing up conflicts, well, my soul is involved now. And so I start with the conflict and I start to work out the conflict, or even just express the conflict, stay in it, just stay in the agitation. And then somehow things will start to unravel going forward. Go for the juicy stuff.
Thanks, Mila. Laura?
Yeah, I just feel to share like some of the feedback that I did get about, so it was, because it's not online yet either, I don't think. And it was because of these, I have a few emotions about feeling emotion. So whatever the suppression techniques that I use to suppress emotion, right? So whether it's like ridicule from external environment or judgment or all of these things, these are what are preventing me from accepting that I am a soul. So, and this was a few years ago now, so I think I'm starting to see things a little bit differently. So it means that I'm more physical centric rather than soul centric. And so that, we're looking towards physical ways to correct physical ailments instead of looking at emotional ways to correct physical ailments, or, that kind of thing. So, but I feel like there's some gold in that, because it's possibly similar for a lot of people. Like when we've got these blockages to feeling, then yeah, we're going to feel like we're disconnected from our soul perhaps, or not recognize that we are one. But like what Karen was sort of saying, there's all of these ways that we already function as a soul. Like it's not really possible not to. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought, I just felt to share that. So.
Thank you, Laura. Michael?
Just real briefly, I have a recollection of what I think the quote was.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Okay, I think I remember the quote. Anyway, this is closer. I think he said, we have to become at one with our emotions in the process of becoming at one with God. Does that sounds right? Yes.
Now you're muted. Okay.
We're all mute. So I haven't heard that one either. It seems to resonate, but I'm kind of like, oh, that makes sense, because being in your soul means being emotional and expressing everything in your soul. So who needs facades if you can do that? Yeah, I think that resonates. Makes sense. Yeah.
But I think being in our soul, we need an added couple extra pieces to become at one with God.
But we do have to be in our emotions all the time in order to, because that means you're actually even in your soul, and then whatever at one means, I guess, happens there. Interesting. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Judith?
Those mystical spirits are tampering with your microphones, I think. The whole book, or these past two chapters, isn't it about Aphraar connecting to his soul in the Judgment Seat, as well as this next chapter? So you have to know who you are and feel your emotions, and I think know everything about yourself in order to move forward and become at one with God. Like no stone is unturned, basically.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Judith. Alicia?
Not on this question, but on the question of the comment that Judith made about questions. Just because it came up for me today was realizing that one of the reasons that I love asking questions, but there's another part of me doesn't want to ask questions because of past punishment or being the troublemaker because I ask questions, or never getting an answer, or getting a lie instead of an answer. So I just thought I'd mention that in case it's something that could be a feeling of block for you too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Anyone else? And when I was reading this, as soon as Aphraar said, "Can you speak plainly?" I'm like, yes, thank you, please speak plainly, because mysticism mystifies me, and I don't quite always feel like I don't quite understand everything that is being conveyed, and that there is more depth than what I'm actually getting at. And then I just feel kind of, and then I'm kind of harsh with myself for not understanding when I'm being spoken to in that way. I thought that I heard one phrase, and it was Jesus, and I think this is one of the earlier YouTube videos, and he had said something about that he felt he was not really connecting with his soul yet. And I'm like, well, if you're not, well then heck, where am I? Like, I'm like, what am I doing? I thought I was connecting with my soul. And I'm thinking more like in communication and with my soul. And then I really started to doubt them, my ability to, or that what was actually happening. Am I actually connecting with my soul or not? So I started to question all that. So I couldn't pick up on which video that was. I've forgotten which one it was that I was watching when I heard that. But that's where all the doubts came up for me anyway. But thank you for all your answers. That was really good. It was really good. That answered a lot for me, and that helped. That really helped. Yeah. So I guess we have only one question left, and sorry, this was the one that I actually didn't number for you. I was really struggling with this one. So this is, I think, towards the last page of this chapter. And this is, so far I have but spoken of the seeds which have been sown by those laborers of whom the world was not worthy. I have made no attempt to estimate the value of the harvest they shall reap in due time, whether it shall be 30, 60, or 100-fold. I am interested just now in pointing out to you how justice values that one unpremeditated act by which you threw off the physical and found admittance into the higher life. This was an instance here in losing of your life, you found it, and that the child you brought out with you was, and Aphraar saying, was, yes, I gasped, and he made the momentary pause. The child that stood on the greater pedestal in the prologue of your vision, whom you imagined to be the Christ child, ye did it unto me. So I felt like I didn't quite grasp this really well. And so I'm just asking you, what do you think Aphraar is really teaching us here about God? Does this change your view of your own actions during your life on earth? Mila?
I didn't understand the child. I didn't understand what he was referring to. If can somebody expand on what that was about?
Michael?
Do you remember the quote where he says, whatever you do unto the children were, maybe the children were with him and he was teaching the elders, whatever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. Or maybe it was what you do unto my brother, you do unto me. I think it was, I felt it was that spirit. It was a fulfillment of the Bible teaching.
So is that supposed to be God saying that whatever you do to another, you do to me? When with the image of the child, is that what that is?
No, I thought it related to Jesus. Remember the servant is the least among you is the servant of all, kind of washing each other's feet. And so I thought he was saying, okay, so now that you're questioning it, maybe I'm confused. But I pictured, do what you do to somebody who isn't worth much, somebody who's a child, you're really doing it to Jesus, because he loves the children, and God loves everybody so much.
Yeah. Okay.
Please, somebody else elaborate.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mila. Michaela?
What that quote stimulated in me was this concept, similar to what Michael's saying, is that when we choose to serve God, we do that service by serving all his children, and loving them and honoring them and recognizing that through loving them, we are expressing our love to God. That was how I kind of perceived it.
Oh, thank you, Michaela. Karen?
Yeah, I agree with what Michael was saying. I feel it was in reference to the Bible quote. And if you look at the last sentence where it's Aphraar was imagining that child on the pedestal to be the Christ child. And so I feel like God's saying to us, look, God loves all of his children so much, and anything you do to another one of our brothers and sisters, it's as though you've done it to him. Like, that's how he's viewing it. And so this, if you think back to the last chapter, he wants us to learn how to love one another and to love God. And so by loving one another as ourselves, and that teaches us how to love God ourselves as well.
Yes.
That makes sense. So I feel like it's in this paragraph, I feel there's a lot of things that it's alluding to about God, because it's saying like those laborers of whom the world was not worthy, I've made no attempt to estimate the value of the harvest they shall reap in due time. And so it's saying people here on earth that we think, oh, they're not really worthy, they don't have much money, things like that. God actually really values those people. So it's teaching us that God has a different value on things than we do. I feel that's one of the things that's being talked about here, and that he really rewards things. Like when you look at this, the harvest, whether it be 30, 60 or 100-fold, he's really looking at each individual act into its full scope. And so he's really, I feel, very detailed in how he's measuring things, much more detailed than how we are. And he's looking at things over a much longer time period than we are. We tend to just, I know I do, I just kind of look at things, the instant result that happens, but he's maybe looking over thousands of years. If you've taught somebody something, then they've taught somebody else and somebody else. That act keeps going and going and going. So I feel like it's showing us that God has this long-term view of things, and that God must really value love. When you do something that's loving, God really, really values that. He really rewards it. So the fact that he's rewarding it shows that he values it. And yeah, I think that's most of the things I had on what I felt. Yeah, that was really teaching us. And when he said, does this change your view of your actions during your life on earth? No, I don't feel it. I don't feel that. There was nothing that I read there where I felt, oh, yeah, I'd feel like I'd like to change something about myself there. No.
Oh, thank you, Karen. I guess what it brought to mind for me was earlier in the, I guess was when the judgment seat, when it was said that you don't see accomplishments being laid out here. But on earth here, we value people for their accomplishments. You know what I mean? So that is not a measuring stick here. But so that's how I feel like it's changed my view of what I do here on earth, that I'm being measured by how I love, not but what necessarily what I've accomplished, right? So I agree with that. So thank you for that. So we've got Pat and then Alicia after that.
Oh, when I first read "You Did It Unto Me," it kind of blew me away. I thought, oh my God, it's everything I do to other people. I'm doing it to God as well. And then I thought also what I'm doing to other people, but also what I do to myself, because I do sin a lot to myself. And I figure everything I'm doing to myself is also doing it to God. I don't know, what I came up with might be totally off base, but this is what I kind of was thinking. God's given us all gifts to be developed and shared with everyone else and to help everybody else. It's sort of like the talents. What are we doing with our gifts? And if we appreciate the gifts, we will use them. And if we do that, we're assisting God, because God's plan is to redeem all of us. So if we're all working together in a loving way, we're helping God, we're just helping everybody achieve that goal. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but that's what came up to me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pat. Alicia?
Yeah, nothing really different from everybody else's marvelous sharing, but I felt also that it doesn't, I mean, it's wonderful now that, because I didn't believe in God before, but it's wonderful now that I do to a certain extent. But even if I didn't believe in God, whatever I'm doing that's loving or unloving, I'm doing to God anyway, whether I'm consciously aware of it or not. And this also brought up for me, this part brought up for me, I tend to have focused more on the things that I'm doing wrong and are not loving, but somehow it helped me be more aware of times, even well before divine truth, of times when actually I have done a lot of things that I didn't realize they were loving from God's perspective, but they seemed to be anyway. So this brought up a little bit of faith for me. And yeah, you did it unto me. For me, that's God rather than Jesus specifically, but it's because everybody is a child of God. Everyone is, and a creation of God. So whether I treat an animal or the environment or a person in an unloving way, I'm doing that to God. And I can see how, because this part of his journey is in the letting go of the last remnants of the earth. And this part is when he's really letting go of the last remnants of the earth in connection with God. So somehow this feels important that this is happening now in this sphere that he's in.
Yes.
I don't know if any of that made sense, but anyway.
Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
Judith?
Yeah, I just wanted to expand on what Pat said, because I kind of had the same feeling too, in that God creates what God knows. And so we're all unique and we all have a little bit of God in us. So when we don't express ourselves, how does that impact everything, and what it was God's goal in doing that. When we would all be healed and be at one with God, what would we create then and become then? It just made me think of kind of like this bigger picture that I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense either, but
it does. No, I hadn't thought of it either. Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Michael?
I wanted to share something. I had a reaction. I had a moment when Karen was talking about God being happy when we love somebody. And what happened, what flashed inside of me that melted me a little was I have this idea that, God sets out these rules and, okay, everybody, you're going to be happy if you love. So when we actually do it, when you were saying it, Karen, I had this feeling that God was really sweet, and like God kind of zeroes in on and thinks it's really sweet when we love somebody. And so there's this juxtaposition of this huge being, and all of a sudden he's really sweet and he's jumping up and down. Yes, you did it, you did. That's fantastic. And having that excitement that he shares.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. That is a great vision. Oh, yeah. Anyone else? Karen?
I maybe just wanted to add just another thought, similar to what Michael was saying, how because God has created us, he has created all of us, he's created the environment and all his creation. So whatever we do to that is really to him. Like I just felt like even something, maybe not the greatest analogy, but I was thinking if, say I painted a beautiful painting and then one of my friends came over and just said, oh, that's terrible, and started to destroy it and hit it and things like that, then that's really no respect for myself, because I've created that. And so because God has created every single one of us and has created all this planet for us to live on and all these beautiful laws and things that help us, and so when we don't appreciate that and we sin against that, I feel like that is really, God feels that. But then when we love that, so if someone came over and really appreciated something that I'd created and loved it, I think that's showing appreciation for the creator of it, and God must feel that as a beautiful feeling that we have chosen to love. We've chosen to love our brothers and sisters, the environment, and especially God. That's the ultimate thing. I think, like Michael said, make him jump up and down when we decide to direct, our love towards God.
For sure. Thank you. That is true. I did feel beginning to feel how loving God is. But I also, from this chapter, for me, it makes me want to cry as soon as I say it, is I am beginning to understand God's mercy. He is merciful, and just saying it just expands my heart, and to know this, and it gives me such hope and faith in that God is loving and merciful. And I guess I'm just beginning to feel just a little bit of that. I intellectually, you have all these understandings, but to actually, when you start to feel it, as a whole different ball game. It's so different. And I hope to be able to expand on that, because I just really felt it with this chapter for me. It was God's love, but especially God's mercy. Yeah. Thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives and your feelings on all of in this chapter. There's so much here, and it's and without this forum and all your inputs, I would not understand nearly as much as I do. So thank you. Thank you.